Canada and the rest of those G20 countries are conferring on how to deal with the global impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, but can they agree on a common approach? Already the United States is insisting the virus be called the Wuhan virus, and Donald Trump refers to it as the Chinese virus. That kind of language seen by most countries as unhelpful. Where are we headed? Colin Robertson is the Vice President and Fellow at the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. He's a former Canadian diplomat in Hong Kong and Washington. He's with me now. Good to see you, Colin Robertson.
Good to be with you, Peter.
Let's start by having you set the scene for us of these G20 discussions. Prime Minister talked to his counterparts today aimed at trying to frame a global response to this pandemic. What is the context as these leaders try to find a unified approach, not just to what's a health crisis, but an economic one too?
No, that's exactly right, that they want to keep the world is going to slip into recession this year. That seems pretty clear. Both the IMF and the World Bank have said but what you want to do is try and get us out of that. So that's the economic side. And then, of course, there's the healthcare crisis. And that's dealing with the challenges both nationally and internationally. Borders, of course, have closed, but there is not enough supply of all the essential services. And so this is where the G20 should come to play. They did an excellent job in trying to pull us out of the 2008-9 recession, which was a financial crisis. And so they're now seen as the kind of the world's fire brigade, or the managing board of directors, because collectively they represent about 80% of world output and 2/3 of world populations. So getting the leaders together is really important. Now they're dealing with the healthcare, as you say, as well as the financial crisis. And on the healthcare side of things, it's tricky because we don't have a vaccine. But what we should be doing is trying to pool all that information, learn from what China, who was afflicted first with this, as well as countries like Singapore and Taiwan and Korea, who seem to be managing better this situation than, say, Italy or Spain.
All right, so the need for, you've sort of described what's at stake here in terms of the G20 getting this right and making sure they're on the same page. And yet, I don't know, as you watch where we are in the world, there seems to be a shrinking appetite for multilateralism, not a growing one.
No, I think that's right. But the good news is they at least are meeting. But if you look at what happened yesterday when the foreign ministers from the G7, and this should be the group that is most cohesive because these are the Western developed liberal democracies, got together, they couldn't come up with a communique because it broke down because, as you said, the United States, which is, of course, engaged in what is more now than it had been a trade war. Now I think it's a geopolitical war with China. Want to call this the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus. That's extraordinarily unhelpful. This is something that affects everyone. Yes, the virus and influenza comes out of China, but you've got to deal with this internationally because when it comes to the virus, it doesn't matter, what your country is or what your nationality is. We're all subject to it.
Right. So what does that suggest in terms of the ability to come to some kind of consensus approach then? If they can't get past what we should call it, what's the likelihood they can agree on some kind of a global plan to help pull us through it?
Well, you got to hope that the enlightenment dawns. But when you look at this disparate set of characters, where I'm afraid now the despots and the wannabe despots outnumber the kind of liberal internationalists, those who would prefer the multilateral approach, you can't be optimistic. If we can't get it right in the G7, then with people like Vladimir Putin and some of the others in the G20, I think it's going to be very hard to bring this together.
So let me just stay there for a moment, because
Sure.
What we're also hearing, and I'm sure that's a conversation of G20 leaders as well. Other countries keep stressing the need to limit contact and step up quarantines to try and arrest the spread. The U.S. president is talking about business as usual in the United States by Easter, and those are clearly two conflicting messages. How does that help?
Well, Donald Trump is, I guess they say, sui generis. Even his health specialists, Dr. Fauci appears with them, simply say, no, this is not likely. We've got to self-quarantine. There's a whole number of things we have to do in their interim. But to take you back to what do we do if the G20 can't sort it out? And I think we still need a multilateral response. And I think there's enough like-minded countries, Canada included, Germany, France, Spain, as well as others. I'd include the countries we're running against, for example, in the UN Security Council election, like Ireland and Norway. They'd be on side, New Zealand. I think we've got to come up with a kind of multilateral response and then of like-minded, and then let others come onto that. But you just can't wait because countries want direction. Our prime minister coming out every day and saying what's going on, I think that's what our citizens expect. It's what I think the global population expects now of world leadership, that they can come together and come up with something. And if they can't do it, then another group should be able to do that.
All right. What do you expect will come from these discussions? Do you think they can pull something together? Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, I think on the economic side, yes, because I think the IMF and the World Bank have already put together a package. Finance ministers have met, so there seems to be kind of growing consensus on broad stimulus package, while at the same time making sure that those most afflicted in each country gets a check from their governments. But there's also going to be the big demand now from developing countries, and that's what both the World Bank and the IMF are pointing out to the G20, is that you've got about 75 countries that are in desperate shape that need both direct money for healthcare assistance and also money to keep their economies going if we're going to preserve globalization. So I think that there'll be an inclination on the part of leadership to put money in the bank, but on the healthcare front, I'm afraid it's still each country for itself, with the shortages of ventilators and things like that. But what we really need is a world effort to start producing this stuff, get the supply chains producing the ventilators and the masks and things that we need, and that would bring China and the United States back together, and working together, pooling all the information. That I do see some sign that the world's doctors and medical faculty are pooling information to try and come up with diagnostics and a vaccine, which is really what we have to move towards.
All right, Colin Robertson, always good to hear you on these issues. Good to talk to you again, and stay safe, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Peter.